This is Pushing Boundaries, a podcast about pioneering research, breakthrough discoveries, and unconventional ideas and unconventional people. I'm your host, Dr. Thomas Virney. My guest today is Daviarr, which I'm told rhymes with caviar.
Indeed. Yes, indeed.
Daviorr Snipes, who is the new Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the Stratford Festival. And Stratford, of course, is the place where I live. And the Stratford Festival stage is right across from where I live. So this is a very intimate connection we have here, Daviarr.
Yes.
Welcome to my podcast. Tell me, please, what is equity, diversity, and inclusion? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, for me, foundationally, equity, diversity, and inclusion is about making as wide of a space for as many different people as we can. And for my focus, which is the arts, I think that is essential to what we do, because the reason I'm a part of the arts is because I think the arts is inherently a place that is for all voices, all people, all backgrounds, all experiences. And it is one of these beautiful places where we can all kind of come together and share these experiences and experience each other and learn from each other. So from my perspective, EDI fits best into the world of a theater and to the arts, because the more stories and the more people we have in that particular space, I think the more vibrant, I think the more exciting it makes art in all of its forms. So it is whatever we can do to make that space bigger for all. That is my foundational definition of EDI.
And so how did you get into this? Like, you were not born but being yeah.
Well, you know what, Thomas, I will say actually to a degree I was. Because I think being a Black actor, first and foremost, because above all, I will always label myself an actor. When someone else asks me, who am I and how would I describe myself? It was to be as an artist first. And I would say living my life as a Black actor, particularly one who was born and raised in the South in the United States, I think equity becomes a part of your life unwillingly from the time you're born, because you have to be so conscious of equity to understand the spaces that you are welcomed in and what your opportunities are and how to navigate certain spaces. So it becomes a part of your life and your journey, whether you want it to or not, as a person of color in our society. And I think that, I've always said that one of the greatest gifts I have in equity and being able to do this work is just my own life experiences and pulling so much from those perspectives and my experience and working with other people from in those places and spaces from that same perspective. So when I entered the arts, it was, yes, to tell stories and to communicate with people that I didn't know through this theatrical interpretation, but it was also very much like I loved being in the space as a Black artist. I loved occupying these spaces that I didn't see a lot of people like me when I first started acting back in the late 90s. So it was ingrained in me in that point, and it became a foundational point of my career. And I found that as I went along in my career through different fields, that component was always a part of me, which was, how can I affect change? How can I create more inclusive spaces wherever I was? And so I taught for a little while. I was a public school teacher. And when I made my way back to theater, because that was the calling that never left me, I continued that work in different respects with the Alliance Theater in Atlanta, and before I transferred here to Stratford.
So is that where you grew up, in Atlanta?
Funny enough, I actually grew up outside of Atlanta. I'm born and raised in a place called Macon, Georgia. And Macon is one of those places that a lot of people in the States and even internationally kind of have some connection with because it sits in the middle of Georgia. And it's normally the place people have to drive through to get to Florida or if you're coming from Florida. So a lot of people have had some passing contact with it. And I look back with on Macon with such passion because it taught me a lot about who I am today. So much of who I am came from just being born and raised in Macon. And funny enough, like growing up, I never spent any time in Atlanta. I bypassed it actually to go to New York and finish up my schooling there and to live and work there for a while. And then I didn't come to Atlanta actually till about 2010, and really got to experience the city for the first time.
Hmm. So what drew you to acting?
Wow. Well, it's one of those things where people have said that, well, that's an example of a calling because I remember it as clear as day. I was in my sophomore year of high school and we were reading Shakespeare's Macbeth, actually. And I remember in this class, and I had never gone to a play before in my life. You know, my family never, my family didn't go to plays. Nobody else in my family was an artist. But I remember reading that play, as we often did in class. And I remember I just had this uncontrollable urge to perform the play and not just read it. And then I asked my teacher, like, what, I didn't even know what to ask. So I asked my teacher, like, do we have like ways to perform? Do we have like, is there any way to do? And she said, well, we do have a drama teacher. And she introduced me to my drama teacher who became one of my mentors, John Jones. And that was the start of it. And from there, my start in actually being on a stage was in community theater. In Macon, Georgia, there was a theater company. There's a theater company called Theater Macon, and they had a youth actors company there. And that's where I started doing my first productions. And from there, the sky was the limit. It was off to the races from there. It was what I studied in college, and it was what I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life doing from then on. But it started from that class and just having that urge to do it. And what I found that I loved about it was the storytelling. I loved being able to tell these stories on stage. And I love the communication of that, of like me presenting the story and then the audience being able to respond within the context of the production with like either cheers or jeers or crying or whatever the emotion could be, but also the conversations we would have afterwards when people would come up to you and talk about the show or talk about the role that you performed. And that to me was the thing that was special about
Hmm. Interesting. Interesting. So then how did you segue from acting into EDI?
Yes. So it was in New York, actually, because I was in New York. I was in New York for about 10 years. And I got to this place in my career where I wanted to have a little bit more control over how I got to be in the theater, how I got to be in the arts and where I was going in my life. Because the thing about being an actor is so much is out of your control. So much of it is by chance. So much of it is just being frankly the right person in the right moment and at the right time. And by the time I was in my early 30s, I was just thinking, okay, so what else can I do, because this is becoming a little too frustrating. And that's when I focused on teaching, because I was reflecting back on those people who have been really influential in my life, like the teachers and my mentors. And I wanted to be that too, because I wanted to bring to students and bring to people who didn't have access to the arts like I did. I wanted to bring that experience to them. So I thought that I would focus on teaching and be what my mentors were, which were these actor teacher combinations. And so that's when I went back to Atlanta, and I focused on getting my teaching certification, and I taught ninth grade English, and that was the start of putting me into the focus of access, because that was about student access and providing students an opportunity. And then from there, that's where I taught for about a year, because because when I was teaching, I realized the public school sector was not going to be where I was going to be most effective. It was because I wanted it to be, how can I do this through the theater? And there was an opportunity for me to take a position at Georgia Shakespeare, and where I started working in group services. And the thing that was so special about that is that, again, it was about access. It was about student outreach. It was about community engagement, because it was all for the purpose of how do we get more people into the theater, more people exposed to the theater. So my job was, how do I build community partnerships? How do I reach out to schools? How do I reach out to community organizations and A, let them know about the theater, and B, get them invested into the theater? And that was really the impetus of how I got to this work today. And that was about about 8 years ago, where I really made that transition into community work with the purposes of deep access and partnership.
So I'm going to ask a strange question.
Oh, no. No strange questions at all.
Why do you think it's important for people to go to the theater?
Because I think the theater is one of the most special places where you can learn about other experiences, and like probably the safest way, because it's a place where you can go and hear stories from artists all over the world and hear about their experiences. And you don't even have to go to that part of the world. You don't have to go, to the continent of Africa, to a place in Europe, or to a place in the Middle East. There are artists out there who have the plays that you can go to a theater and see these plays and hear these stories. And you can learn about that experience right there, like in your own city or a nearby city. And I think us hearing these stories and walking a little bit in someone else's shoes is all about the brilliance of the human experience. And it's all about, because the thing that I like about the theater is that I think it is a tool to bring people together, and it brings people together through the sense of sharing a story. Because when you think about the classic sense of sharing a story, going back to like campfire, olden times, where it's just people sitting around a fire, sharing stories, and the communication and the community of that to me is at the heart of what theater is, and how that affects you and how that changes you. Because when I started studying theater, that's the thing that stuck out the most and stayed with me, was that I always clocked how much I was changed by the plays I would read and the shows I would then go see once I was a theater student. And that was something that I knew was so important for me. And I wanted to make sure that other people got to experience that, because coming from my experience, a lower income boy from Macon, Georgia, from the American South, the reason I wound up in Canada was through the world that the theater exposed to me. The theater showed me that there was an entire world out there outside of my own. And not only did it exist, but that I had access to it. So the theater really has, I think, the ability to like change someone's life, because it's because of that, because of the stories that and the societies and the worlds that it can introduce you to, and how that can affect you is limitless.
So going back then, you mentioned that the first play that you were ever exposed to was Macbeth.
Indeed, that is the first play that I remember. That's the earliest play I remember reading.
What was it about Macbeth that sort of turned you on?
Well, this is the interesting thing, Thomas. I don't I don't even know if it was Macbeth specifically. I think it was the concept of just a play. I think because when I think back on that moment where I had this whim to perform, it wasn't exactly what I was reading on the page. It was the concept of being able to read something aloud and be able to perform it and be able to showcase emotions in a performance of a play. It was like when I was sitting there reading, and this is interesting. Thank you for that question, because this is the first time I think I've ever had to analyze it from this perspective. So thank you for that question. But but it was really about elevating what I saw on the page. Like there was because for me, I grew up as an avid reader. I loved reading, and I would just read anything I can get my hands on. And I think at this moment, this was the first time that for me, words on a page had a whole other layer to them that I didn't know existed, that they could not just be read, but they could be performed. And that was thrilling, the idea of that. So it wasn't so much as Macbeth, but what I could do with the words on the page that belonged to Macbeth. And that was so exciting. Because it was just because I think, and now tying this all together for me, I think for me, reading had previously been such an independent exercise where it was me with my head in the book. But there was something about being able to perform it that took the words just out of being an independent exercise and made it a community exercise, because now I got to share those words with a room of people instead of me just reading them on the page and having that knowledge and that experience only within myself.
So, was there anything in your family background that also kind of supported you in that way? You know, like that you just described. What did your father do?
My dad was into construction,
Mm-hmm.
and my mom was into security. So no one had an artistic background. But what I will say that's interesting, I've always thought if I had to put it together, I got my ability to storytell from my dad, because my dad is one of the best storytellers on the planet. And I think I got my propensity for how to convey just emotions and connection through my mom, because she's a very emotive person and just this very personalized way. So I think between the two of them, because I thought about this recently, it gave me the tools that I needed as a performer, even though there was nothing, they didn't do anything necessarily like from a traditional artistic space. I mean, of course, construction, has an artist component to it and all of that. But I think those are the things that I took from them, because I was very close to my parents, and I was very observant when I was younger. And I think if I look back, I can trace those things to those two qualities.
Did your mother or father read you stories at night when you were a child before going to bed, before going to sleep?
No, because I was actually, this is the funny thing. Like, they would always give me books because, like I say, I was such an avid reader. I would just read books all the time. And I would just read books by myself at night. But what they would do whenever I remember my dad doing this a lot, like he would just find books at the construction sites he was working for. Like if they were working on a school and there was books left behind, he would just bring me books back from the site, and I would just read those books. And my mom, had a membership with this like online, like it wasn't online back then, but it was like this phone and book club for books for kids, and I would read those. So they would give me books all the time, and I remember it was just I could not read enough back then, because I enjoyed the knowledge that I got from books. I enjoyed learning from books, and that was the thing I think that pulled me into them so much.
So, considering how much racism there is in the United States, even today, I would imagine that 30 or 40 years ago, when you started your career into acting, you must have run into some obstacles on that score.
Most definitely, because what I ran into, and it's honestly, it's still something that the industry is dealing with today. It is the theater. The thing about theater that I think is very important about the work that I have to do, it is making sure that the theater does not become too segregated, and it's making sure that the theater is not only seen as an offering for the elite. That theater is something for everybody. That theater is not just for the highly wealthy or the highly educated, but theater is truly something for all folks. And I think particularly when I was first into the theater was very much in a place of it being elite, and particular, or more specifically, it was something that was more of an opportunity for the white community, more so than the Black community or any communities of color, because it was something that existed and was funded traditionally, and communities that had a higher income, that had more access to the theater, that for families who could afford season subscriptions to a theater company. So it was something that and so that became like this inherent like kind of separation of who had access to it and who didn't. Because again, just coming up in the public school system like I did, it was, I hadn't seen a play. My schools would not take school trips to see a play. I mean, I didn't take my first school trip to see a play until I was about a senior in high school. But before that, I had never, and by that point I was already studying, I was already doing theater with my local theater Macon. And but before that, it was, so that connection wasn't there. So when I was auditioning for theater, I would often be the only Black person in the room. And of course, with that, there is the stigma of when you are the lone someone in a space, there is the weight of that. There is the uncomfortableness of that. And you're not always sure how welcomed you are into a space like that. Especially when people that look like me weren't normal in that space. It wasn't like, oh yeah, we would regularly have Black actors in there. There were Black actors who would occasionally come through Theater Macon, but it wasn't something that there was like, oh, every year that there was 10 Black actors who would work there. It wasn't that. So, and that was something that I consistently dealt with. And it is the notion that at some companies that I would audition for, even when I got to New York, it was the sense that, well, if you're Black, you can't audition for this role. So there was a traditional, just a marginalized aspect to being a Black actor in the arts that we are more aware of today. But I think there still needs to be a very conscious effort to correct that and to fight against the theater from being something that is only for one group of people as opposed to all people.
Right. My wife and I, we were in Sarasota last year, and we went to a theater. Are you familiar at all with the Sarasota theater scene?
I am. I've never seen a show there, but I know a lot of people who've worked there. Mm-hmm.
So there is one theater which is owned and run by Blacks. Mm-hmm. And we went there to see a play which was called Blacks on Broadway, or Blacks, something like that. Mm-hmm. And it was all about Black actors on Broadway. It was fantastic. Audience, I would say, was 90 to 95% white.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And we were, we spoke to one of the directors of the Playhouse and asked him about that, like, where are the audience, right? And he said, and I want your response on that, what your thoughts on that?
Please.
He said that Black people are used to going to church and church services, and that is their community, and they are able to express themselves and to call out and respond, and they are not able to do that, or they don't feel they can do that in a regular theater. So they don't feel at home there, so they don't come. What is your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think there is absolutely a lot of truth to that, because I think the biggest thing that I deal with as an EDI director and as someone who focuses on community engagement and community outreach and partnerships is people don't see the theater as a place for them particularly when you're talking about people of color. Because, and I would say more than anything, it is because there's normally not a lot of outreach, because a lot of theaters don't have a focused community engagement director whose job it is to go into communities that are not part of the audience and build those communities. Because when you think about a theater season and the limitations of of what you can do within a theater season, within the run of your show and the seats you have to fill and the time you have to do it, the natural inclination is just to go to the audience that you know will already be there for you. That you go to the audience who are going to be your subscribers and the people who you know you can get to subscribe, because that's all you have time to do. And you're not going to take the time to go out to the audiences that you don't have and try to cultivate those audiences, because cultivating audiences takes time. It takes time to go to those audiences and see what are the things that they need that you can provide that will make them more comfortable in your space, and then to hire the people at your theater so that when these new audiences come, they are reflected within your theater. So there is a lot that goes into bringing in new audiences outside of just going to get them. So, and I think that is daunting for a lot of theaters. I think a lot of theaters don't even know where to start when it comes to doing that work, because again, I don't think they have people on staff who can launch those conversations with these communities, because those folks don't come from those communities. So there's a natural awkwardness about how do I even start that conversation? So there's a lot that goes into what it takes to bring in a community to your theater audience. And so I think, yes, it is the fact that people feel more connected and comfortable in a church setting, but that is because when you look at particularly the Black churches are in Black neighborhoods, they're in Black communities. So there's and they'll do things like they hold functions throughout the year that opens their doors to you. So there's a natural inclination to feel more comfortable there. Think about if a theater was able to do something like that. If we had more theaters in these communities that would have things like that, that could just as easily get those audiences inside. But that's what we don't have now. And that's why a position like mine, I think, frankly, exists, because it's to help try to build those bridges so that we can start finding these ways to bring people in. So yes to what that director said, but there's another component I think that is part of the life work of theater that we have to do to correct it.
Speaking of another component, I'm thinking of the plays themselves. Like, why would a person who has struggled, all their life just to get a good job and neighborhood, why should they care about what happened to Richard III, Hamlet in Denmark?
You are 100% right. It is programming, and what you put on a stage is huge to the audiences that you can bring into your theater, because not only did and that's a major barrier, because again, when you think about the subscriber base to a theater, typically it is going to be a predominantly white subscriber base, just generally speaking, and oftentimes you want to put shows on your stage that your subscribers are going to be invested in seeing and buying subscription packages for. So you can think about, okay, can we put things on our stage that are going to give us the opportunity to reach out to a new audience? But as I just mentioned previously, the work it takes to build up that audience's trust in your theater can take a few years, if we're being honest. And so in that time, will the theater take that risk to turn off some of their audience members, for some of their current audience members and subscribers, with these shows that they're programming that audience might not be as interested in seeing, while they try to cultivate the new audiences? So there's this balance that you have to make while you're trying to bring in new folks to your theater. And so it's this thing you're constantly wrestling with, which how much of our programming do we diversify for the sake of the new audiences versus maintaining the subscriber base that we currently have. And that's also a thing that leads to fear and leads to the hesitation for some theaters in going for that outreach and developing that outreach, because of that inherent risk that exists.
Right. So in terms of your own outreach, since you have Stratford, can you tell me what sort of interesting outreachy things you have done?
Yes. So my biggest thing is I've reached out to Stratford Perth Pride. I've reached out to Destination Stratford. I've reached out to the city of Stratford because all of these organizations have like very ingrained focuses on EDI and inclusion programming and memberships. And because what I'm looking at is how do we develop like a community squad or team that is unitely focused on making Stratford more inclusive overall. Because when we think about bringing in new audiences, it's not just, as a resident of Stratford, you know better than I. It's not just about bringing people to the Stratford Festival, but it's about bringing people to Stratford, Ontario, the city itself. So it's about how do we also make sure that the city is inviting and welcoming for these new audiences, so that there's less of this sense that when I come here, I feel like an other. Now, that is a Herculean task, but I think it is an achievable task when it is simply about what can organizations, what can businesses do? Because eventually, what I would like to do is bring in some business leaders as well into this group to just what can we do to make our business more welcoming to people from outside communities who are coming to Stratford for the first time, because it's not just about getting them here for this performance and this show, but how do we make sure that they keep coming back for years to come? Because that's not only good for the theater and for the Stratford Festival, but it's also great for the city of Stratford. If we have these new people who are comfortable and enjoy coming back here year after year. So that's where I am right now in the three and a half months that I've now been at the Stratford Festival, is forging these new partnerships so we can all grow together and look at these opportunities for how we can expand these opportunities of inclusion to the city itself outside of Stratford, because it all intersects and it all works in tandem.
And what about Black communities?
Yeah, that's the next level that I'm reaching for, is how is the Black communities outside of Stratford that I can reach out to, particularly in surrounding areas like Kitchener, Waterloo, to of course Toronto, but Hamilton. I'm very early in those outreaches, but that's the next step of where I am, because first I'm starting with Stratford and the organizations that I can work with here, but the next step is who are the Black organizations. I've already started initial conversations with Afro Toronto, which is a Black-run media organization, but also looking at organizations outside of Stratford, of the places that we can partner with, as a way to talk to them to see, hey, what do you need in order to get you to come to the Stratford Festival, and see if that could be a place you would want to explore. And then from there, in those conversations, it is taking those notes and kind of having the strategies for what we can do at the festival, and then what we can do within the city itself to kind of start laying that groundwork for that. And because it's gonna be a little bit of a trial and error for those first initial interactions. But what I'm ideally looking for when I really get into those conversations in depth, is to find as much of a solid foundation, so that first impression, the members of those organizations and the communities of those organizations, what their first impression is when they come to Stratford, to the city and to the theater, is a positive one. So I'm very excited about really launching that outreach and taking it to the next level, and seeing what is their exposure to Stratford and to the festival, and if that is limited, then what will it take to make them more aware and to make them invested in taking a trip here. And again, that's going to take time to cultivate, but that is what I'm most excited about, is expanding to those communities who have never been to us before, and what that can do for the city and the theater.
How about yourself? Have you felt welcomed here in Stratford?
In some ways, yes, and in other ways, not as much, because I think Stratford is a very charming place, and I love that it is very much reminiscent, really, of my hometown, Macon, in that it's a place where people know each other. It's a city that is very much community focused, but the thing about it is when it's a city that is as tightly knit as it is, you are aware of the people who are not from here. So there is a sense that when you are a person of color coming into Stratford, you very much feel like an outsider, because there's not a lot of diversity that you see, and you feel that just in the community, because sometimes you'll get looks, and sometimes people will give you that acknowledgement that clearly that they know that you are a visitor, and that can make you feel maybe as if you don't belong, because you never know like the context of where that's coming from. Sometimes sometimes the subtext of that can be, oh, hello, welcome, but you don't always know that. So you don't know if it is a welcome or if it is a what are you doing here. So that can be a little bit unnerving in regards to the level of comfort you feel in a place. And that kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier when I was first doing theater, and I would be the only Black person on stage in a production. And when you first go in for that first audition, there is that initial sense of, what is this space going to be like? Because there's just only one of me in this space, and I don't know if this is going to be a hostile environment, and I don't know if this is going to be a positive environment. And so it is, and that is the thing that makes you feel unnerved when you're in a new space, particularly as a person of color. So part of what this community network that I'm looking to can hopefully do is talking about that. It is when you're in this city and you're going into these businesses, what are the things that we can do so that when a person is here for the first time, they feel welcomed, and what does that look like, and what are the things that we can do to encourage that? So I would say yes and no to an extent in regard to my comfort level in Stratford when I first arrived.
Are you here by yourself, or are you?
I am. I came here absolutely by myself, which is exciting for me, because I spent a lot of my career touring around the United States as an actor, and I had the pleasure of visiting 47 out of the 50 states when I was touring with a theater company, TheaterWorks USA. So I've worked regionally in a few different places around the states as well. So I have a lot of experience in like being in new places. And so I'm very good at, because of that experience, very good at getting acclimated to a place quickly, because I'm used to it and I enjoy being in new places. So I came here on my own. I was very excited about that, because it was time for me to make a change, because I had been in Atlanta and working at the Alliance Theater for about 8 years. And I think as an EDI director, for me, it is good to kind of change your environment so you can continue to grow in the work and think on the work in different ways. And when I had the opportunity to come here, I just thought it was ideal, because what better than to come to a place like Canada and a place like Stratford at the Stratford Festival to work in EDI in this particular space, and to be stretched and to be challenged and to think on new ways to handle issues in this environment, which I did not have a previous exposure to.
So I take it that you are single. You are not in a relationship.
I'm dating someone right now who I've met here in Canada, but when I came here, I was single for the first few months. Mm-hmm.
But you're not single anymore.
Well, not right now, no. So Canada's been great for that.
If you could have dinner with any three people, dead or alive.
Wow. Wow. Okay. I wish I knew that was coming, Thomas, because I've thought about this question a lot. Okay. Dead or alive, we can have dinner. Let's have a conversation.
Anybody you want to.
Anybody I wanted through history. Oh my gosh, this is good. Okay. So number one would be Franklin Delano Roosevelt, former president of the United States. Number two, I've got to go with an artist. So I think I would go. Okay, I'm going to reset this. Okay, so that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was number one. I would love to speak to Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart.
Oh, that would be interesting.
I've always thought that would be an interesting conversation. And then number three, of course, Denzel Washington,
Mm.
because I think I've got to speak to an artist, and I think that another thing about Denzel Washington is whenever I've heard Denzel Washington give an interview or tell a story, I see him as one of the most fascinating individuals who is very much a straight talker and has so much knowledge of the industry and of the art. So I think those will be the three people
Okay,
off the top of my head.
I have no trouble seeing you as the first and the third, but I can't quite see you as Mozart. Tell me.
Well, the thing about I've always been so I love classical music. I've listened to classical music since I was a young child. It was something that was always just interesting to me. And when I learned of Mozart and that Mozart was a genius musician at the age of 7, how a brain like that must operate is fascinating to me. So I don't know how a person with that kind of genius operates in a normal world. So it would just be to see how this person would even carry on a conversation, how this person would operate on my wavelength. Like, would I even be able to follow this person's train of thinking? Because I have to imagine that someone like that fluctuates on a whole different frequency of thought. So it is the measure of that there are certain levels of genius that just fascinates me in how they see the world and how they function in the world. Because it must be, I've always been fascinated by the character of Sherlock Holmes because of the same concept that if someone is truly that brilliant, it must be torturous to be in a world of people who are not as brilliant as you. What is that like to just try to have a conversation with someone where you can think 5 steps ahead of them? And so something like that are things that I think about. I wonder like how fascinating that conversation must be.
Hmm. Do you play chess?
I do not. I've always been too intimidated.
Oh,
I've always been too intimidated to play chess.
that's too bad because I love chess. I'm always looking for a good partner.
Oh yes. Can if I can ask, what is the thing? Is there a singular thing that you most love about chess?
It's the logic,
Mm,
the logic. It's logical. It's
mm,
totally 100% logical. It does not depend, as opposed to cards, for example, it
mm,
depends on luck. Both of you start, I mean, if you are white, you get the first move. So
mhm,
gives you that gives you a little bit of a advantage.
mm,
But after that, it's for every move there is probably a best counter move, and
mhm,
there is a best counter move, and so it goes, and there is an infinite variety. Like I've been playing since I was 10 years old, I think, something like that.
mm.
uh, I'm constantly learning. So I just love that idea that you're always into something new. Like
Yes.
it's never the same, never the same. So if you want to have chess lessons, I'll be more than happy.
Oh, that sounds fantastic because that I've always been fascinated by it. And I think as an artist, particularly, I would love to play it because as you just said, the strategy is always changing. And that is something that very much relates to me as an artist because I that's what I experience when I do a play. Because every time you get on that stage, even though you're doing the same play, it's never the same thing every night because the audience is different. You're interacting with another human being, and what they went through that particular day is going to influence what they do. And so there's always these added variables to it that can change something and make it something new and fresh every time. So that's fascinating. I feel I would love that.
But but isn't that also anxiety provoking because you don't know what's going to happen in the next moment?
Not for me. For some, maybe, but for me, that is the thrill of the stage. That is the excitement of the stage. Is you don't know what can happen next, and you have to be prepared for it. And it always keeps you on your toes. Some of the greatest moments I've ever had on stage have been when things went horribly wrong, because it is always the measure of, one, can we cover this so that the audience doesn't know anything went wrong? Or if it's such a big wrong that the audience clearly sees it, how do we turn this into the show so that it becomes a part of the show and actually pushes the action forward? So it's kind of like it's a thrill because it tests you. It tests what you can do on that stage and how you can do it, and I love that.
Okay, so you said some of the most thrilling moments were when that happened. So looking back on your very rich and interesting life, what would you say was the one peak experience that you have had, the one experience that was just absolutely perfect and made you feel really, really alive?
I have got so many. It is a matter of which one you choose. Okay. I was doing a production of Hello, Dolly in New London, New Hampshire. And I was playing Horace Vandergeld. It was a very special production for me, because for a Black actor to have that part at that time, back in the early 2000s, it was a special thing. Because the actor playing Dolly was white. So this was in a theater that wasn't known for mixed race casting at that time. And so it was a very special opportunity. And during one of the later scenes where Dolly and Horace are having their interaction, and Dolly had a moment where she was interacting, she was riffing a little bit, and she got lost in her lines and forgot where she was in the script. And so we had a second where she lost it, and then she and I just started kind of improvising with each other a little bit, where we just started within our characters just kind of making up lines that weren't the lines in the show, but we're still like moving the action forward, and we're in line with the characters. And the thing about it was that the audience knew we were riffing, because before we started riffing, Dolly had clearly shown her hand that, uh-oh, I've forgotten where we are. And the audience when the audience sees that, they lean in a little bit. Because for them also, not just the actors on stage, but for the audience, they're thinking, well, what's going to happen now? Are they going to fall apart, or are they going to take this somewhere else? And then she and I starts ripping back and forth, and then we start kind of joking with each other within the context of the scene, and the audience is eating it up. They are loving it. They are laughing along. And then we finally get ourselves back on track and get the show going, because we have to get the cues going for the next person to make their entrance and for the music cues to come up. But in that and it's very short. It's always just a flash that these things happen. They're never elongated. But in that little 2-minute stretch where it was a matter of, she and I didn't quite know where we were going to go, the audience didn't quite know where we were going to go, but we were just all in on the ride, and it was just, let's just see where it takes us. And those are the moments where the magic happens, because everyone's engaged. And as I spoke to earlier, you're having this fully community moment where everyone's just together and taking the journey simultaneously. And those are the moments I think that are so special in the theater, because those are the moments that the audience remembers. And it's also what takes the theater out of being just this very stagnant, just professional thing where things go from one moment to one moment to one moment, and all of a sudden there's something new that is all of a sudden, oh, what is this extra element that we have now? So yes, that's what things like that are just thrilling for me.
You could call it looking for magic.
you're always aware. Yes, you're always aware of when that particular moment, when those moments are going to happen. And sometimes it's just when things are going well and just going great, and you just have this really just unique connection with the scene partner on one particular performance. And other times it's something like this, where something out of the norm happens. But yeah, I've got so many stories like that. That's just, and it's why I love this so much, because those moments are just so special. And those are the moments, again, that leaves the impression on the audience, so those are the things that I'm grateful for.
Thank you for that. Just one more question.
Please.
What does being human mean to you?
I think being human means always growing,
Yes.
Always looking. I'm sorry.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, always growing, because I think one of the gifts of being human is that you always have the opportunity to learn. And I think, and you can learn in so many ways. I think you learn from people. That's why inclusion in the arts is so important to me. You can learn from the things that you expose yourself to, from something as simple as like taking a trip to a new city, or even experiencing a new restaurant. I think to be human is to be constantly growing, and all the ways that we can grow, which is, sure, one is just naturally aging, and what you learn from the experience of just aging and just having experiences that you can reflect on, but also from what you expose yourself to. So to be human is to constantly grow, and because it never stops. We will end our lives still learning. And I think that is a fascinating and special thing, that no matter what, no matter how many degrees we have, no matter where we are in our life, there is still always something else to learn from. And I think that's special.
Well, thank you. We have to stop. I wish we could continue. Perhaps another time we'll pick up on it.
Anytime.
And if you want to learn how to play chess,
Oh my gosh.
really, really, I mean it. I mean it. I love
it.
I love to teach just the way you love to act and
Yes.
all that important stuff. My guest today was Daviorr Snipes, Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the Stratford Festival in Stratford, Ontario. And I just want to say thank you again for a most fascinating conversation, and want to tell our I was going to say viewers, but it's not our listeners and our viewers, because we also do this podcast just in audio, and we also do it in video. Mm-hmm. So our listeners and our viewers, that next week I will have Jano Volpe, who is the founder and managing partner of SLV International, a Toronto-based company which specializes in distributing and exporting Canadian food to Southeast Asia, Mexico, and EU. But in addition to that, which is really what I like about him, is that he started a podcast called Behind Greatness, engaging in conversations with entrepreneurs, artists, scientists, Olympians, musicians, actors, philosophers, and corporate leaders from all over the world. So please listen to this podcast next week. And now I need to say goodbye, Daviarr, and see you at the chessboard.
I will see you soon, Thomas. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.